So I'm glad to do this webinar. And like, I'm glad to do it anyhow, but partly to do it in support to the people that had damage in the storm. So at this time, it's been a very difficult month for growers, for market gardeners, because they've had quite a lot of losses. So in a way, so as I've said, I'll do whatever I can for the growers, because it's a very valuable community of people and hardworking, and a very important job that the growers are doing. And I also know that there's some people coming on this evening that just want to grow a few salads for themselves, and you're also very welcome here this evening to this event. I have to say also that Barry McDavid helped me in putting together the slides, which was quite interesting, because Barry has been growing now for 2 years, and it was kind of interesting to have his input, because I sent him off the notes and he did the techie stuff, and we were over and back then. We had quite a bit of work to figure out how we would actually present it, because he was given a certain perspective on how it would be for him if he was trying to understand this subject, basically. So thanks, Barry, for that. Okay, so Sarah is going to move on the slide, so we can move to the first slide, Sarah, please. Okay, so if I can, so I put this together, as Kitty said, I put this together because what used to happen is that sometimes when I give classes on salad leaf production, or I'd meet people on the street, or I'd meet them at OGI events or wherever, they would say to me, how would you actually start? The whole thing is, it's really daunting, this concept of, I want to pick a crop and I want to grow this crop. And it's really daunting to visualize how I'm going to go about having a continuity of supply. And sometimes I said to people, such as, and they said to me, salad leaves, for instance. So lettuce leaves, salad leaves, put into a bag weighing 100 grams. So how would you go about it? And then I thought, okay, I need to break this down and keep it really simple. And I began to think, I'll just have it in a very simple format. And I actually thought my idea would be that people would start with a very small quantity of lettuce, a small quantity of salad bags for sale each week. And then if they had success with this, then they would multiply up. So I designed a whole kind of garden around what I'm going to talk about this evening. And so what I did was, what I came up with an area, and the area would be the size of a tennis court. So if you could visualize that. So a series of, what I had a polytunnel and I had an outdoor area, but the whole area would be roughly around the size of a tennis court, which would be quite small if you were thinking about growing produce for sale, okay? And the polytunnel that I choose the polytunnel of 50 foot long by 18 foot wide. So that was the polytunnel I choose. And for instance, I looked up such a polytunnel and to buy brand new, and I saw that it would cost €3,600. So such a polytunnel. So that was kind of like, so that's my polytunnel. So you need, in order to kind of think about producing a crop. So we'll talk only about salad now this evening. So in order to talk about or to think about producing, you need a plan. You need a game plan. You need to visualize the area. You need to make it out on paper. So our working thing this evening is, we have a polytunnel 50 foot long by 18 foot wide. Okay. And such a polytunnel, when I looked on Dundee, brand new tunnel, doors, everything was costing €3,600, just to give you an impression. And okay, so I picked my tunnel. My tunnel is 50 foot long, 18 foot wide. And in that tunnel, I have 5 beds. So the beds are 30 inches wide. The path is 12 inches. The beds are 30 inches wide. The paths are 12 inches. Okay, so you can see already how I'm beginning to think if you look at the slide. So I'm already into figures and I'm already into order. So what I have, I'm very clear in my mind. I've got my 5 beds. I've got my width of my, I've got the width of my bed, the width of my path. And the other thing that's I already establish on paper is that it will take 2 trays of lettuce to fill such a bed. So you see, I'm already calculating figures, and you'll see now as we go along, it's all about figures. You have to have this mind, or you have to have it recorded how figures work. Okay, so that's my tunnel. And then outdoors, I have 10 beds and they're 50 foot long. And again, it's the same width bed, the same width path. So what you go for is you always go for uniformity, because when you go for uniformity, you take all the guesswork out of it and you actually reduce your labor considerably. So I'll give you an example, for instance. So we know now that it will take 2 trays to fill a bed. So it takes 300 plants to fill a bed. So once you know that, there's no kind of like wondering, have I got enough room for my lettuce that I'm sowing next week? You cut out all the guesswork. You cut out all the stress of wondering where you're actually going to have room for the plants. So you're working towards a plan all the time. And then we streamline it. We always streamline. So whether it doesn't matter what size the garden is, but what we want is regular units, so as we're not double guessing, or we're not running out of room, or we don't have enough beds ready, and even from the point of view of knowing how much leaves you're actually going to have to harvest, the whole thing has to be streamlined. So that's why I've streamlined it. Okay, so I have my polytunnel and I have my outdoors, and that's going to come up time and time again now in the next few slides. Can we move on, Sarah, please? Oh yeah. Okay. So I had to look at the slides again today to remind myself, and we're going to skip over this slide now fairly quickly, because I remember when I did this with Barry, and I hope Barry is here this evening. I think he is. When we did this slide, I thought, I had a different way of looking at this. So we'll jump over this slide quickly, and at the end we'll come back to Barry and we'll get him to explain what he meant by this slide. Is that okay? So we can move on, Sarah, please. And we'll come back to that slide now. Okay, so the lettuce plants. So basically, we're talking about, in order to go into the salad bag in the spring and summertime, we're going to have predominantly lettuce leaves. We're going to have a little bit of rocket, and we're going to have some orientals, but it's going to be predominantly salad leaves. Okay, and the concept is that you're sowing the seeds into a plug tray 150T. So they're cylindrical cells, and they produce very, very good quality lettuce plants. And this is the type of plant that you want. If you look at, they're nice, strong plants, and they have very good root formation, and they have no evidence of yellowing in them. So they're your plants. And what happens is that you sow your lettuce seed into your plug tray, your 150T. You raise them for approximately 4 weeks in that tray. And then after 4 weeks, you take them out of the plug tray and you put them in the ground at a spacing of 8 inches by 8 inches. And then you let them grow on. And when they come to a certain stage, you start harvesting them. Okay, so that's that's roughly about 80% of the bag is made up out of these lettuce leaves of various colors. Okay, so that's what our plants look like. We can move on, Sarah, please. Okay, and then now this is 100-foot tunnel. This is one of the tunnels here. So you can imagine if it was a 50-foot tunnel, it's half the distance. But that's kind of what the beds look like. If you look at those straight rows, different varieties of lettuce, and all very uniform. So that's so the 2 beds of lettuce that you can see, that's your 30-inch bed, 12-inch path, and this is what it'll look like when it's growing, both indoors and outdoors. And they're not ready for harvesting yet. They're not far off actually from this first harvest. And you need that type of uniformity in order to get the yield. Okay, we can move on, Sarah, please. Oh yeah, sorry, I better just look at the thing. Okay, so what's the plan? What's the plan for the spring? Okay, so we have spring, summer, and then we have autumn. Okay, and so in the tunnel fitting into this plan, initially you have 5 beds in the tunnel available to you, and initially you're going 4 beds. By the time you're finished, what you're doing is you're sowing every week. You're sowing every week, you're planting every week. I'll have a little calendar in a minute now. And what your tunnel will look like in the month of May is that there'll be 4 beds of salad in the tunnel, and there'll be 1 bed dedicated to orientals and rocket. That's what will happen. Okay. And so you needn't concentrate too much on this now, because I just want to give you the concept, and then the beauty is that you get this talk later on, so you can actually get the figures. You'll be able to go through it again and say, how much do I actually need to sow, and all of that type of thing. So the plan is that to fill this area with salad and to have a continuous supply of salad, what you would actually be doing is you would sow half a tray per week you would sow 75 seeds per week. Is that okay? Okay, so again, it's figures and it'll reveal itself more as we go on. So we can move on, Sarah. Okay, so if you want to produce a continuous supply of salad, as indeed any crop, if you want to, you need a cropping calendar. So we always have this. This is exactly what a cropping calendar looks like. So you have sow, plant, harvest, those 3 pieces of information. And it's so important to follow your cropping calendar, because this is one of the things. What happens is that people get busy and they miss out on 1 or 2 sowings, and then what they end up with 2 months later is being acutely short of salad leaves. So it's all about the sowing, about the cropping calendar. And what I generally suggest to people to do is that you'd print off this calendar now, and you'd also have a notebook, and you'd actually in the notebook you would write, you'd have 1 page where you'd sellotape in this cropping calendar, and on the opposite side then you'd have actually sow, plant, harvest, and you'd have actually a record of what you actually did. How did you, was harvesting a little bit later than what I anticipated or something like that. So you'd begin to build your own cropping calendar as you go forward. Okay, so I've made out a cropping calendar for the lettuce. And what I'm saying is that you could start on the 28th of February. I'm not sure what date today is. So you could start on the 28th of February. And so you don't need any heating cables because you've started so late. And what we generally do with our first sowing is we sow double the amount that we actually need. So on the 28th of February, you'd sow 150 seeds. And the reason for that is, particularly if you're a new gardener, it's prudent to double sow the first one, because when you plant the first batch of lettuce, it's inevitable that you're going to have a problem with leather jackets. So by having 75 plants extra, what you can do is you plant the first 75 plants, and then as you have a few casualties, you dig up the plant. When you go out in the morning and you see that the plant has been beheaded, you dig it up, you remove the leather jacket, and you put a new plant into its place. So you have no interruption in your quantity that you need. So we generally double sow the first sowing to get over leather jackets and to get over wireworm. So it's kind of a prudent thing to do, particularly if you're starting with a garden. Okay, so what I have done here very carefully is I've made out my sowing dates. So on the 28th of February, I have my first sowing, the 6th of March, the second one, 7 days later, the next one, 7 days later, the next one. Okay, so I know with some experienced growers, they don't sow weekly. That's totally fine when you have a good bit of experience. But if you sow weekly, you're greatly reducing the risk of running short of lettuce, you're greatly reducing, because what you're doing is you're going to meet hiccups with weather, and you're going to meet hiccups with too wet, too dry, too cold, too hot, all that type of thing. Whereas if you sow weekly, you have this continuous supply of lettuce coming, and it tends to make life a lot easier. It's a lot less stressful, basically. The other advantage with sowing weekly is that you're spreading your workload. You only have to sow 75 seeds every week, which is quite a small amount. And you only have to plant 75. And you're basically spreading your workload. You're spreading getting the ground ready, you're spreading the planting, everything about it. So it's very prudent to sow weekly. I still sow weekly. I like it. I like it because it just reduces all that stress. It takes all that weather factor out, Okay, so I very much stick to my pattern. Like, we're actually going to sow here tomorrow now. Tomorrow's Wednesday, I forget what date it is. And I'm really going to have my pattern then. I'm going to be sowing every Wednesday from there on in, Okay, and again, you don't have to remember this detail, but if you see, like, we go up to the 10th of April, and in the 10th of April, we make a double sowing. So for this particular plan, we're sowing 150 seeds. And the reason for that is that 75 of the plants go indoors and 75 of the plants go outdoors. And you can see that we have an explanation for that. P for polytunnel, O for outdoors. So that's very important, because what happens is that ensures a continuity of supply. Because what can happen is that if you don't stagger in and out, you can end up short of lettuce a month later. Okay, and then with some people would say to me, okay, I can't afford the polytunnel. I'm going to have a few outdoor beds and for the first year. And so what I would say to you is that's probably your first sowing, the 10th of April. That's your first sowing for outdoors. So what you do is if you can't afford a polytunnel, you don't have a polytunnel, you just plug into the outdoor sowing, and you can see where that's commencing. Okay. Yeah, so that's my chart. And, we're very clear where the plants are going, whether they're going indoors or outdoors. And then we have an estimated harvest date. Okay, so we can move on. Sarah, please. Okay, so there's my thing. There's our thing about our double sowing, and this was Barry, and you can see on so the kind of brown earthy maggot or whatever you want to say is a leather jacket. So they they like lettuce. They like so they're the young of the daddy long legs, and by the month of May they have flown. But now at this time of the year they're waking up after the winter, and they're pupae basically. They're coming out of pupae, and they eat young lettuce plants as you plant them in the spring. But once you kind of flush them out with the first or second planting, they become less and less in the polytunnel, and they disappear. And then the one in the soil is a wireworm, and some of you will be familiar with wireworm, and they come from when you bring a garden from old pasture. When you come from old pasture into a garden, you can get a lot of leather jackets in the first year. And again, as you go on with cultivation, they become less and less. Okay, so we've kind of put in an insurance against them by the double sowing. We can move on, Sarah, please. Okay, so you see these beds are actually, it's here in the garden. These are 50 foot long, and they're 30 inches wide, a slightly wider pat in this instance. But that's how spring and summer lettuce will look like. So you can see the lettuce is at. Okay, so the first thing is that we've got a selection of varieties. We've got different colors, and we've got different shaped leaves. So that's an integral part of having a salad bag. A salad bag has to be interesting to the customer. So we've different types of leaves. And then if I look at it carefully, on the right hand side beside the courgettes is the most mature lettuce that we're harvesting. And when I look at it, I can see beside the courgettes is the most mature we're harvesting. The one there in the middle is ready the following week for harvesting. And the one beside the sweet peas on the very left is the following week for harvesting. And you can see the bed where the ones are newly planted. So that's kind of, but what will actually happen is that you've made your sowing every week, and what happens is that you end up with about 6 to 8 weeks of sowings at various stages in your garden. That's what actually happens. And what actually happens is that you're harvesting from maybe 3 or 4 of the mature sowings. So you're not, so what you do is you harvest and then you tidy up the crop. That crop grows back, you harvest again. And I'll explain that a bit more in a moment. But that's kind of what it looks like. So this garden now was in production, and we were harvesting X amount of kilos per week from it. Yeah. Okay. We can move on, Sarah. Okay. So here's my outdoor cropping calendar. So up until that, it was my indoor cropping calendar. So on the 10th of April, I have sown for outdoors, and then then I'm going outdoors. I'm planting the 10th of May. I'm harvesting the third week in June. And you can see again, I got my double sowing because of a problem with leather jackets, possibly outdoors. So I kind of getting out of that problem. And then I'm sowing weekly again. I'm still sowing weekly until the 7th of August for my outdoor production. Okay, we can move on, Sarah. I know it's a lot of graphs now, but you can look back on it afterwards. And again, that's my another section of the garden. I think it probably was another year, and I'm going to emphasize that we're sowing half a tray weekly. So what I suggest is that you get this 150T tray, and you either cut it in half, or else you fill the entire tray, and you only sow 75 cells, and the other 75 cells you don't actually sow anything in it. And then when you grow on your plants, and when your plants are finished a month later, you can actually recycle the peat. You can tip it out and reuse it for to sow again. Okay. So you can see I have my detail that I have 18 sowings, and basically what you're aiming to do with the outdoor sowing is you're aiming to harvest as long as possible into October. Okay. Yeah. So we'll move on, Sarah. So I'm not really kind of getting into weed control that much now. Somebody can ask me a question about it. But I'm more focused on how it works mechanically, how the whole thing works mechanically. So that's what I'm focused on, this sowing. I'm focused on the sowing technique, the continuity of sowing, and my spacing is 8 by 8. You're constantly sowing, you're constantly planting, and that's where my focus is this evening. Not so much on weed control or anything like that. Okay. My second thing that goes into the salad bag is salad rocket. Okay, so about 80% of the bag is made out of lettuce leaves, and then about 10% of the bag is made up of salad rocket. So nice combination. So you've a bit of orientals, you've got salad rocket, and you predominantly have lettuce leaves. Okay, and the thing about salad rocket as a crop, so it's always sown indoors. It's always sown indoors because of flea beetle, and also it doesn't like rain. So in order to have quality, you think it's always going to be in the tunnel. Okay, and what I've said is that you're sowing the seed directly into the ground. I kept it quite simple. The rows are 11 inches apart. You can see here where the arrow is going. The rows are 11 inches apart. 30 seeds per foot run. So you've got to discover a way that sometimes what we do is we put the seeds, we count the seeds and we put them into a thimble, for instance, and we discover, okay, how many seeds fitted into the thimble, and we discovered that we've managed to put 30 seeds into the thimble, and then we measure out a foot on the bed. So the bed is 2.5 foot wide, and we measure out the foot with a measuring tape or with a ruler, and then we shake the seed from the thimble into the 1 foot run, into the little trench. So we're quite accurate in the amount of seed that we sow per foot run, because we want a particular size of leaf. We want a particular size of leaf. And the thing that's interesting about it is that if your rows are 11 inches apart You put 30 seed per foot run. The seed germinates, it comes up, and the very minute the leaves start tipping one another from row to row, you start harvesting. And the method of harvesting, you go along with a knife, you cut the plant, you cut it above the growing point, and then it grows back again. So you have this, and you'll end up getting maybe 2 to 3 cuts depending on the time of the year from the salad rocket. So you very much get it into being a cut and come crop. Okay, so you start sowing it directly in mid-March. The soil should be warm enough, and what I'm suggesting is that you sow 3 rows every fortnight. You sow 3 rows every fortnight. So I have a kind of a picture now, and it's going to evolve as we go. So my picture is that I'm saying that you're sowing 75 seeds of lettuce every week. And now suddenly I'm saying that you're sowing 3 seeds, three rows of rocket every fortnight. Okay, so what I have a figure in my head. I have a figure in my head as to how many salad bags I'm actually going to produce per week using this method. Okay, so I'll reveal that in a while now. Okay, so I'm working towards a plan. And I don't want too much salad rocket, and I don't want too little. So I have that idea. Okay, so we can move on now. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so this is what the rocket. So what you have here is you have, see the bed that's kind of full. So you've got red leaves. You've got 2 rows of red leaves, and then you have 2 rows of green leaves. So the green leaves beside the peppers is salad rocket. And that's what salad rocket looks like, growing ready for harvesting. So 30 seeds per foot run, 11 inches apart. Now I'm actually going, it's a bit confusing because I'm going the other way with the rows, because I'm going for much higher production of salad bags per week. That's the reason why I'm running long ways. I'm actually sowing a bed a week of it. But that's what it looks like. The reason why I put in the picture is that's what salad rocket looks like when it's ready for harvesting. Okay. And then the other part of this slide is that the third item in your bag is red and golden frills. So red and golden frills. So the Mizuna, red and gold. So it's so frills and Mizuna. That's the third item in your bag. So it's a brassica, the same as the rocket. Okay, always sown indoors because of flea beetle again, because of it doesn't like rain, and it just eliminates all those issues to sow it indoors. And what you do is you continue sowing it indoors during the summer, and you've got a good overhead irrigation system in your tunnel, and there's no problem to grow it. If you've got good organic matter in your soil and you've got a good supply of water overhead, it won't be running to seed. And if you sow it directly, it slows it down from running to seed. So again, 30 seeds per foot run of what we call the orientals. So my choice is a red frill, a golden frill, and then Mizuna. So that's my oriental choice to go into the bag. They're not too peppery. They've got a nice pep to them and a nice color in the leaf. Okay, so start sowing in mid-March, and then again I'm running it's across the bed I'm going, because it's a small quantity that we're talking about, relatively speaking. So 3 rows across. And the other thing that's quite important in my plan is that I have my tunnel. My tunnel is 50 foot long. It's 5 beds in the tunnel. And if you visualize that in late spring, 4 of those beds are occupied with lettuce leaves, and 1 bed is occupied with the rocket and the orientals. Okay. And then what I made out very carefully was that as the lettuce outdoors comes into production, naturally enough, the lettuce in the tunnel is finished. And as the lettuce in the tunnel is finished, it frees up the bed to continue sowing the rocket and the orientals indoors. I hope that makes sense. So there's no point in me presenting a plan to you if I haven't made out that I have enough room to fit all the crops in order to have this selection in the salad bag. So that's so important because if my 50 foot long tunnel by 18 foot wide didn't have sufficient room to grow these orientals during the summer, what would happen then is that I'd have no orientals to put into the bag during the summer, and it would be just salad leaves, and the customer would become really disappointed. So once you now, you can have variety, you can have changes, you can have all that, but the bag has to be interesting. The bag has to be interesting. You can't just fill it up with lettuce, or you can't just fill it up with big leaves of lettuce. It has to be really interesting. And I mean, it's quite a lucrative product, salad bags, if it's done properly. And I'd say for a lot of growers, and a lot of growers here tonight would agree with me, that probably salad bags are one of their best sellers. It's one of their best sellers, and that you've got to streamline it in order to that you don't have this interruption in supply. And the other thing is that if you keep sowing and you streamline, it keeps coming ready, so you're not picking old leaves, or you're not going around looking for kilos. It's just developing as the year goes on. So that's what makes for very efficient harvesting, to have a plentiful supply of it. Okay. Right. So that's my thing. So we'll move on, Sarah, please. So I don't hand weed. Okay. Right. So that's that. And then this picture was actually taken from here, and so what I have is I have my spring production. We call it production. I have my spring production in the tunnel. I have my summer production outdoors, and then I move into autumn production. So there are three different conversations, if you like. If you said to me, I want to grow salad leaves and I want to grow them 52 weeks of the year, you need to have these 3 distinct cropping plans. Okay. And in a moment now, you're going to see my winter production cropping plan. And I like winter production. I like winter production because you have much less sowings. The crop creeps. The crop is slower to go to seed. It keeps producing. It produces for a long period of time. The customer likes it during the winter. They like winter salad. I like it, and it's an income source. It's an income source. I suppose I was trying to think of this. So I suppose we probably were doing, in the winter time, we would do at least 150 bags. Yeah, more even. We do 150 bags. So that was 300 quid every week from from salad, so standard. So it was always there. It was always plugging along. The production was in the polytunnel, so it was actually quite nice harvesting. You weren't out in the rain, and you could harvest at your leisure, And this was my winter production. This was my tunnel just 2 months ago or 6 weeks ago when the picture was taken. So what I have here is I have orientals, I have salad rocket, and I have lettuce leaves. And I probably have done one or two pickings. I picked quite lightly off them, and the salad is finished now because of the blooming storm. We lost the plastic, but the rocket and the orientals are okay. So we're still harvesting them. Okay, we can move on, Sarah, please. Okay, so here's my winter. I'm back into my polytunnel, and you can see again, I have my 5 beds, and you have to be very clear what's going where, what's happening. So you have to sow enough to fill the tunnel, and at the same time you have to have sufficient room. And so what we have in the winter time is we have 1 bed of lettuce, we've 2 beds of miner's lettuce, 1 bed of rocket, 1 bed of orientals. Okay, so that's my winter plan for my polytunnel, and this is where my salad bag is going to come out of in the winter time. So I've been cropping outdoors until October, and then I continue outdoors as long as the quality is good enough, and then I hold on to this for as long as possible. And once it's ready, once I no longer have quality outdoors, I move in and I start harvesting indoors. And I'm quite happy if there's quite a build-up of leaves coming towards Christmas, because over Christmas there'll be quite a demand, and in January, and then I can harvest quite heavily December, January from the polytunnel. Okay, so we can move on. Sarah, please. Okay, so salad leaves. So I have 1 bed, and it takes 2 trays. Okay, and I have 4 sowings. So this is very important. So you must sow on time. Sometimes what happens is the weather is really nice and you have a lot of lettuce outdoors and you think, I'll never run out of lettuce. But you must start sowing in time, because the days are getting shorter and the growth won't be nearly as good as what it was in the summertime. So it can be quite deceptive. You think, wow, it's going to be ready and I'll have no harvest, no place to sell it. But you must start in time. So we do our first sowing in mid-August. We do our second sowing a fortnight later, early September. Then we go mid-September, and then we go end of September. So we 4 sowings, fortnight apart, and we stagger the sowings because that kind of balances it. Yeah, so that's our salad leaves. And then our miner's lettuce. Our miner's lettuce is brilliant. So we really go for it. So at this time of the year now, 85% of the bag is miner's lettuce, and the customer is quite happy. So it's heavy leaves, it's very nice, and it's very, very good quality leaves at this time. So we end up, and it's a crop that grows well in low light. So we don't bother growing it during the summer. It doesn't grow particularly well in the summer, and it doesn't taste as good as summer clatonia. So we go for winter purslane, and we have 2 beds of it, and we sow them in 77 trays. So that's slightly different now. So we put a pinch of seed in each cell. Sorry, no, it's always, when you look at these things, there's always a correction that you could make. So it's a pinch of seed in each cell. With the salad, it's 1 seed per cell. But with the minor lettuce, it's a pinch of seed per cell. It needs to be in a 77. Because if you put it in a tight cell, the bottom leaves will get red. And it will keep that red, hungry look for most of the year. It must be in that bigger cell in order that it doesn't get hungry in the tray, and that it's not, the roots are not restricted. So that's the other reason. So we sow it in 77s. It's well worth it. So we've 3 sowings. It's a good idea not to sow too early, because otherwise you go to seed in the heat of August. So we sow in early September, mid-September, into September, and we plant it at 8 by 8 inches, and we need 300 plants per bed. So we need four trays per bed. I actually have a pinch of seed in each cell there. Didn't see that. So you need 8. Okay, so you need 8 trays altogether. Okay, in total. So we can move on, Sarah. Now, salad rocket. So the funny thing, I saw this slide. So these are the reason why we put this in is because we put in they're the rows across the bed, 11 inches wide. But one of the things when I saw this slide, I thought of pulling it back out. And one of the things you should train yourself to do as a gardener is you should train yourself to observe the crops, and you should train yourself to observe the soil, and this is from here now, this picture, and when I look at the soil there, what I can see is that the soil was too wet for sowing seeds into. Look at the way the germination is erratic. It's not even. So it's not an even band. And then if you look up further, if you look at the footpath looks quite wet. And if you look up further where it's not sown already, the ground looks clammy. And it's very good to train yourself as a gardener to read the soil and read the condition of the soil. And yeah, it's a very good thing. So in my mind, when I saw that slide, I thought, well, that crop never came to anything anyhow, because it was sown in less than ideal conditions. But it's a very useful thing. And one of the things that's useful about it is that, look, the reality is that sometimes things don't work out. I can't remember the reason why that was too wet there now. Maybe I forgot to turn off the sprinkler or something. But the overhead irrigation. But the thing is that once the crop germinates, or once you put the crop in the ground and it begins to grow, what you should do is you should look at that crop every single day, observe the crop every day, and see, is it performing the way it should perform? Kind of train yourself to understand crops and understand that they should, have a certain look, that it should be nice and green, that it should be doubling in size. Maybe dig up the lettuce plant, look at the root, see that the root is moving out into the soil. Kind of train your eye to observe the crop. The same as somebody would look at an animal and see whether they're healthy or not. Train your eye to do this. And the trick then is that if you found yourself in the position like I found myself in here, what you do is you think, okay, that crop isn't going to perform. I better mind it, or I better sow again. So it might be a combination of both. So in some instances, what I do is I don't scrap the crop, but I think, okay, it's not really going to perform. I'm only going to get 1 cut out of it. I'm not going to get 3 or 4 cuts out of it. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cut my losses. I'm going to find room, and I'm going to sow again quickly in order to not to be short of salad rocket for my bag, you know. So that's what. So it's a very good thing to do to train your eye. Okay, so here's my winter salad rocket. So you're sowing an entire bed, 30 seeds per foot run. I know I'm repeating myself. 3 sowings, early September, mid-September, into September. And again, that we put the spacings because we want to be clear about it. And in the 50-foot tunnel going across the bed, you will have 54 rows. So you're sowing 18 rows per bed, you know. So yeah. And then with the orientals, I have 1 bed, 3 sowings, again, 54 rows per bed, and 18 rows per sowing. So again, that's related to the end product and is related to the amount of space that we have. So we can move on, Sarah. Okay, so we're almost at the finish. So these are my varieties that I'm trying. These are the varieties that I grew in 2024 that I was very happy with. So with the salad leaves, what I tend to do is I go for lettuce head varieties in the seed catalogs. That's where I go, because what we found is that they yield the best and they perform the best, and if you harvest them properly and you harvest them on time, they have a very nice shaped leaf. So we don't bother with baby leaves, you know, these lettuce baby leaves in our particular system. What we want is we want a leaf, say an oak leaf, we want it about the size of your hand going into the salad bag. So that it's quite a robust leaf. And also what we want the customer to eat the lettuce. It's not just for decoration on a plate and pushing aside and not eating it. So the salad bag is destined for, you know, for a farmer's market or for a delicatessen or a whole food shop or a super value or somewhere like that. It's a point of sale where the customer is buying it, they're bringing it home, and they're actually eating the salad. It's not going into a steakhouse where they're just putting it as garnish and they're pushing it aside. It's going to be eaten, the salad. So nice sized leaf, not too big. Nice selection of colors, red and green, and then a nice variety in shapes of leaves, you know, so some oak leaf, some other, and butterhead as well, actually. So my varieties for 2024, and I'm more or less stuck with the same varieties for 25. So I went with Till, Rubinette, Red Salad Bowl, Briwari, Finja, Piro, Serbiata. And what I found is that you can actually grow them indoors and outdoors, which is quite nice. Yeah. And then in the winter time, we're not growing any of the reds. We're not growing red salad bowl or anything like that in the winter because it doesn't retain its color. We're just growing Briwari butterhead lettuce. That's our bed of salad in the winter time. Okay. I just got the catalogue from Elsom's, and I have to say, just looking through it now, they might have more, but they've only 1 organic variety, and it's a green lettuce. So they don't, on their catalogue, they don't have a selection. Maybe if I ring them up, they might have a selection of them. Yeah. So I had something else to say. Okay, so a few things. So I think that's the last slide, is it, Sarah? Maybe she can't. Yeah. Okay. We'll hang on for a minute now. So how does it all work together? So So picture this. So you have your lettuce, and you start sowing your lettuce, and you start planting it. Okay, and you plant it at 8 by 8. Okay, so if you plant it by 8 by 8, somewhat like the varieties that I've described, these kind of head varieties, the very minute they begin to touch, you you harvest the outer 4 or 5 leaves. So you have to be quite disciplined about this. So visualize this. So you planted your 75 seeds. The very minute they touch, you begin harvesting. You begin harvesting lightly. Okay? Because you've sown and planted every week, the following week, the next batch that you planted will be at the same stage, and you move on to that batch, and you harvest there. Okay, and then the following week you move on to the next batch, to planting, sowing and planting tree. You move on to that. But when you move on to the third batch, what's actually happening is that the first batch is actually, you can start harvesting it again. So what is eventually happening is that even though you started when the lettuce was quite young, as you move along, up along the bed, if you like, the old lettuce regrows and comes back, and you harvest that also. So you get into this pattern where you're harvesting from about at least 4 sowings. You're harvesting from at least 4, maybe more sowings that you've made. The beauty of that is that if you're a beginner, we'll call it, or you're a newbie, is that you decide, okay, I'm going to take this on, and I'm going to produce these salad bags, and I'm going to start selling these salad bags. What happens is that when you start with the first 75 plants, you only have, well, I'll tell you the figure. This is giving that they grow well now. When you start harvesting the first 75 plants, as well as having some of the orientals in that out of the tunnel, you will have 19 salad bags for sale. Okay. And what that does is that you go and you source your customer, and you find your customer, and you say, you might go to a veg shop, and you might go to a whole food shop or something like that, and they might say, okay, I'll take 10 bags of salad off you every week, and we'll see how it goes. And the objective is that if your product is good, it will grow. The demand will grow. It's ambitious to think that you will go in at a high demand at the beginning. So what you'll start doing is you'll start with your 19 bags. You might have to go to 3 outlets. You might have to give 6 bags into each outlet in order to grow the customer and grow the market. So what you do is you quite happily deliver your 6 bags to each of the customers, and then you go back the following week. And when you go back the following week, hopefully demand has increased. And as demand has increased, because you've continued to sow and continue to plant, your production increases. So you're able to match, your production matches your demand, if I make sense. So that's very often how I would start with a crop. I would never expect that I'm going to go in at this really amazing high quantity. I have to be happy that I have to convince the customer to buy this salad bag, and to change their mind as to what type of salad they buy. So I start small, and then because I've sown and because I have a continuity coming, I can actually afford to grow my customer and grow my demand. And I made out that such a model, 75 seeds per week, conservative, that it would start you at 19 salad bags, and then being 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 quite conservative, then it would bring you up to 60 salad bags per week. It would bring you up to 60 salad bags. That's where I thought about. Yeah. And like what we were doing, and I think that it needs to increase in price now. So we were getting €2 a bag. So we were putting 100 grams in a bag, and if you were selling 60 bags, it would be €120 a week. Price that it would be worth €6,000. Yeah. Okay.
And I think, Jim, as well, that you referenced that maybe Barry might come and talk us through a slide.
Yeah.
So Barry, I might just call out your question, and then when Jim's answering, you might maybe turn on your microphone. And Sarah, I don't know if it'd be possible. Sarah, you're doing an amazing job with the slides, to go back to that second slide that Jim referenced, if that would be okay. And then, Jim, so what Barry threw in was about ideal soil temperatures. So let's say, would you think about direct sowing rocket, orientals, and spinach at this time of year in the tunnel with fleece?
So I think the temperature, well, up until now the temperature has only been 4 or 5, Barry. And today I saw that the temperature was rising rapidly. It just had that nice smell. And I know your particular circumstances, because if you don't mind me saying this, I know that you don't have doors on your tunnels. So you're going to have a lower side temperature as a result. So what I have now at the moment is I have the tunnel reclad, I have the doors closed. I'm just opening one of the pedestrian doors every day, and I'm getting 18, 19 air temperature. And I'd say I'll be at 9 within a week, Barry.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll be at 9 within a week. Now, if I'd no doors in the tunnel, what I would do, Barry, is I'd cultivate the soil. I'd run the rotavator on it, or the hoe, or whatever. I'd cultivate the soil. I'd prep the bed, and I'd put on a bit of fleece on it and get up the temperature that way. Yeah. And I'd check my, and if you said to me, I can't get it up, well, then I'd say, okay, you'll have to sow now in a plug tray. It's painful. You'll have to sow in a plug tray and transplant.
Okay. I have a soil thermometer in the ground, and it is reading about 10 at the moment.
Okay.
Now maybe it's not a great or very accurate thermometer, but if that was the case and it was accurate, would you be safe enough to start direct sowing?
Yeah, and put on your fleece.
Yeah.
Put on your fleece and be really conservative with your. So only water if necessary. There should be sufficient moisture in the soil.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So on this slide, what I found, I suppose, challenging was those transition periods from being inside to going outside, and when, so I was trying to get a sort of a visual picture in my head as to what the year would look like.
Yeah.
So those periods in kind of June, end of May, June, you have a foot in both camps. You have a foot inside and you have a foot outside. Right now, in February, we're 100% inside. And then the August, you really need to have your sights set on those winter sowings in August, back end of August, because if you let them slip, it really hurts you then. It really hurts you later on in December, January, Feb. The growth just isn't there.
So can I ask you a question? So I know we had a conversation about this, and then I said leave in that slide because that's interesting. So are you saying what you need to understand in your head is that there's plants? So look at the orange line. So you're saying that during this period there is lettuce plants in the ground in the polytunnel.
Yeah, correct.
It's not necessarily in production, but they are planted. They could be planted or in production, but they're occupying space.
Yeah, exactly. So the last sowing in the polytunnel is probably end of May, and you're taking leaves from it up until mid-June. Now, if it's terrible weather out there, then that might push into the back end of June. But if you want to get a green manure in, which is sort of 6 weeks of a window, you want to try and get something in there, you've to factor that in. So that caught me out where I didn't have enough time to get a green manure in, terminated, and then a planting. So my first winter planting then ended up being kind of, early September, and then I caught myself, I was on the back foot then in January, February.
Yeah.
So that slide, I was trying to just have a picture in my own mind's eye as to, where my effort was going to be between the polytunnel and outside. Obviously, with Rocket, as you called out there, Rocket is inside all the time. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other thing that we could deduce from that is that if you look at the outdoor one, the grey one, so it's salad that's been produced outdoors, and you look at the outdoor one, and like you could say then that for the rest of the time outdoors, November, December, January, February, March, April, that you should really be thinking that ground should be covered with a green manure. Or sometimes people say, I can't manage that and I need to cover with black plastic, I need to protect it, but it needs to be protected in some form or other, the ground. There's a lot of the year where the outdoor beds outdoors have nothing in them, basically. Okay. Thanks for that.
Thanks for that, Barry. And Jim, another question in from Mary Callahan about the beds in the tunnel. Do you sow or grow your lettuce in raised beds in the tunnel?
Yeah, so they're slightly, so they have no wooden sides, Mary, because it's not practical and it's too expensive, and also the heat of the sun on the wood would have a negative impact on the soil. So what the beds are, so you visualize this. So the beds are slightly raised. So what we do is we put down a string. So we cultivate all the ground. Ground is nice and loose. We put down a string and we mark out our bed. And the bed is 30 inches wide, paths 12 inches. And we just shovel a small amount of earth from the path up on top of the bed. And we form the beds. And then forevermore, and like these pictures that you saw there, and you're talking about a garden that has been in production for 30 years, forevermore, it's the same beds, the same paths. And all we do is sure to keep the beds fertile in that. But once we have our format, we keep it, and it leads for very low maintenance, basically. Yeah. But you see, if people walk on the beds, Mary, it impacts on the quality of the lettuce leaves. There's a perfect example now. So that's outdoors. But we don't walk on the beds. We can straddle the beds to harvest, and we don't walk on the beds because, and like anybody would tell you, like I rocked with salad leaf production. I I was trying to think about it. Like I'm thinking like, let me think, 3 times a week. I'm thinking like 150, 200 bags of salad into super value every single week. Like, do you know, I rocked with it. Like, so does that. It was all about the quality of the bag and the quality of the leaf and the flavor. Yeah.
And just then kind of adding to that, like what kind of fertility plan then would you have in
Yeah.
place, especially
So
the
the
plants?
so the fertility plan was, Kitty, I'm a great believer in this, and people that did the courses with me will know this. So the very minute the crop is finished, I will put in a cover crop. I'll put in some type of a cover crop. So we'll say in the polytunnel, I would say I had lettuce and visualize that I had my beds of lettuce. The lettuce was finished, and I was going to be coming up along filling those beds with rocket and orientals during the summer months. But if I got a window of about 14 or 20 days, I would sow something like buckwheat or something like that. And I'd just get it germinated. And then what I'd have is I'd have this really nice earthy compost that I made from the compost heap, and I'd throw that onto the buckwheat. So I'd be not constantly is the wrong word, but my fertility is buckets of earthy compost going on to cover crops wherever I can. There's no big wheelbarrows of dung, you know. And I'd be constantly see this soil now that we're looking at this slide, like this soil is in super condition, you know. So I'd be constantly pepping the soil. I'd be constantly keeping it in nice condition with this compost, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then, Jim, another message in from Vincent just about harvesting and kind of, what much would you expect per meter in grams, kilos? Now, I presume
Yeah.
they're going to harvest in at different weights. So I suppose it just,
Okay. So I wish so I could see that was a shortfall as we went on that I put it. So my memory, Vincent, is and I'll send Kitty an email about this after tomorrow or the day after. My memory is that eight lettuce plants give 250 grams of leaves. Now let me clarify that. I must look that up. I'll have to look that up. Sorry now. And then, but I can tell you that that with the rocket, when it's with the rocket and the oriental, when it's tipping one another at an 11-inch row, it's a kilo per meter, if you can make that out. It's a kilo per meter. Yeah, there's a kilo per meter. I hope that helps. I'll email that to you, Kitty.
And thank you, Jim. And look at we know you're a busy man at this time of year, but whenever we get it, we'll circulate it
Yeah,
to everybody as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
The questions are heating up now. They're coming in, lots of them. So from Michelle Joyce, just a question regarding transitioning from winter to spring production and navigating limited space in the tunnel. Is it worth going outside in April with lettuce plugs and using microclimate netting?
Yeah, yes. So it's yeah. So we would. It's very worthwhile to have to have crop protection fleece, and to when you go out when you do your first sowing for outdoors, to cover it with crop protection fleece. Yeah, yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I suppose it depends on the area. I know you can get frost up to the end of May here in the Midlands. So I presume different areas are going to have different pressure points as well. Um, and then Connor Macaulay has just a question on spacing, and just what would be optimal spacing for lettuce plants in a 30-inch bed.
So
So
8 by 8, Connor, 4 rows across. So they grow best in a square. They like company, and it makes for efficient harvesting and efficient weed control. So 8 by 8, 4 in a square. And if you visualize that you're sowing, say in this plan we're sowing 75 seeds, well, you should fill a block of the bed, not one big long line. So in other words, you should have almost 20 plantings up along, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and if you looked at our pictures there, it's all in blocks. That's the most efficient way to do it. Yeah.
And when you're direct sowing, Jim, do you use a seeder, or what way are you doing for?
So I do both. This here now, what we're looking at, Kitty, was done with a Jang seeder. But you know that's expensive, like, but incredibly accurate. Now there's quite a skill in using a seeder properly, that you're putting out the correct amount. But basically, I can sow, I can sow a 100-foot bed in a couple of minutes with a Jang. So that's what I use. Yeah.
Which is
I
great.
find, I'll just add one other thing, Kitty. So sometimes people are tempted to buy the Earthway, which is about a third the cost. You don't get that accuracy with the Earthway. And you see, 30 seeds per foot run is the king or the queen, because then you get that particular, look at there, you've no weed control, you've no weeds, and you've a lovely small leaf, so that's what you want. And if you look at the bed on the left, they're coming up, they're just nice. We probably have pushed the hole through them a few times, but you can see how they're coming on nice and evenly, yeah.
Yeah, no, looks great. And then on that topic, it seems that there's two questions in, just asking about weed control, and chickweed in particular was mentioned.
Yeah, so chickweed is high nitrogen. So what's happening that you have high nitrogen? So if you're using chicken pellets, they're quite high in N. So you have to really kind of think about it now. So that's one of the things that's happening. If you have high nitrogen, or if you're using wet farmyard manure, you're running at risk of high nitrogen. So that's that. And sometimes what happens with people as well is that they're overusing the overhead irrigation in the tunnel, and they're calling in the nitrogen too much, And so sometimes we ease back in the watering, and we use the hoe a bit more. And what we do end up doing, if we hoe a bit more frequently, what we do is we end up pushing the nitrogen into the crop, and the crop grows rather than growing chickweed. Yeah, but it's high end. That's what it is. There's something going on with fertility or with watering, or sometimes people as well get chickweed if they're using the rotivate or the BCS at very high revolutions. They can call in too much nitrogen from the soil, Yeah.
Yeah. And Jim, now we're definitely we're pushing on near 9, so we're going to open it to
okay.
anyone has any other questions you want to type in. And then just picking up on the watering, I know you mentioned sprinklers there when you were talking to one of the slides, but just kind of any advice, kind of overhead watering, drip, what would your go-to be?
So my preference is that I want to influence the texture and the crispiness of the leaf. And it's an old horticultural trick that if you want to influence the texture and the crispiness of the leaf, you top water. So we were in the tunnel, we would use overhead irrigation as opposed to drip line for growing leafy crops that we're putting into a bag that we want people to enjoy the leaf. So overhead irrigation all the way. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great, Jim. Well, it seems like I think you've covered so much and in so much detail there. I think that definitely is the end of the questions. But just to say, everybody that threw something into the comment just commended you and just thanked you for what a really good presentation it was. So just to echo that, We really appreciate your time, the detail, the transparency, everything. It was, yeah, an excellent presentation, and delighted that the resource is going to be there. We can share it on our website, and any other supporting information that we can share it on to anyone who's interested as well. So just want to say thanks to everybody that joined. It's your participation that makes all our network events happen. And Sarah, thanks a million for the great tech support. And Jim, just huge thanks again. And yeah, hopefully see you all. This is the last of our webinars for the moment. We've there's a bit going on behind the scenes with the OGI, so we're slower to be able to launch our kind of in-person on-farm knowledge transfer events, but we hope to be able to have more information and be able to roll something out as the growing season kicks off proper. So, you know, in the meantime, we'll just keep in touch via emails. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. I'm sure it's getting busy out there. So thanks for taking the time to join. Okay, good night.